India is probably, I think, underperforming its productivity potential by about 3 percentage points per year. It's doing quite well on the face of it. Over the last 5 years, productivity growth of close to 4%, which is not bad, I mean, much better than advanced countries. But if you look at what Korea or China did at an equivalent stage in their productivity evolution, when they're at the same levels of productivity. In the case of China, it was not so long ago, sometime like 2008. In the case of Korea, sometime in the 1970s. They had much faster productivity growth, or much faster catching up with the frontier. Convergence, as the economists talk about it. Much faster rate of convergence. India was stuck at about 6% of the level of United States productivity for many years. The last few years it's been catching up, but it still has great potential ahead of it, great potential to exploit the scope for convergence. And I would say easily, India should be growing at about 7% per annum productivity if we lift the restrictions on entrepreneurial activity, if we allow product and factor markets to work better, and if we go for greater connectivity through FDI, through global value chains, through all the ways in which we more or less know these things work. So tremendous potential, and I'm an optimist on India for that reason, because there's still great scope to catch up by improving connectivity, and in particular, I would say, by getting into global value chains. Not everyone is going to replicate what East Asia did, the export-oriented industrial strategy, particularly when global demand is weak. But globalization and connectivity isn't just about export orientation. It's also about allowing foreign firms to penetrate your own markets. It's about exports and imports. It's about foreign direct investment outward and inward. And there's still tremendous scope for that in India and in Asia as a whole. India, in fact, shows the greatest gap between its potential to be inserted in global trade and investment and what is happening so far, actually. I mean, India has about 1/4 of the world's labor force, 1/4 of the world's labor force, but it's only 2% of global trade. So, whichever the strategy, export-oriented, import substitution, whatever, there's so much scope for interconnectivity through intra-firm activity, building value chains in several countries at the same time. And I just have to emphasize this. We mustn't think of this in terms of where's the next source of demand? Is it exports or is it domestic demand? That's been the mantra of the international institutions for far too long. We must think of this in supply-side terms. What leads to the best infusion of knowledge? What leads to the best infusion of skills and know-how? What leads to the best discipline at the border? How quickly the exports and imports are cleared. It's a whole different set of KPIs once we are in global value chains. Tremendous discipline, but also tremendous flow of knowledge, tacit and explicit, that comes by being inserted. And there again, India has great potential. So that's productivity. But I want to say, though, that there is a very unusual new opportunity of the last 10 years that India, probably more than any other emerging country, can exploit and is already beginning to exploit. And that is the digital revolution. India is going to see, by most reckonings, the fastest growth of e-commerce anywhere in the world in the next 5 to 8 years. Tremendous scope. And you can already see it. Not just the Flipkarts and Snapdeal, is that what it's called? But there's a whole set of other players. The technology now enables aggregation of demand and supply on the part of very small players. A software engineer can sell his or her services anywhere in the world. A farmer can have his or her product aggregated, bypass the middleman, or purchase fertilizer more cheaply. It's remarkable what the technology now enables. It enables leapfrogging in a way that didn't happen before. Leapfrogging by the small person and the small firm and the emerging country. Leapfrogging and increasing that pace of convergence with the frontier. So I think there's tremendous scope for that. I'm going to speed up a bit. I think the second opportunity, which I'm not going to elaborate on, but which we all know about, is infrastructure. And here we have to think about it not merely in terms of how much public funding we can put into infrastructure, but how smartly we can do it. How do we do it in a way that catalyzes and incentivizes private investment best? That's the strategy. What are the financial techniques? What are the regulatory techniques? And regulation, after all, is free. Regulation is free. It doesn't involve a public expenditure. Smart regulation, certainty in contracts, certainty as to in dispute resolution when things crop up further down the road, all these things are free, but they can catalyze private investment far more effectively. So it's not just a question of how many percent private funding, how many percent public funding, but it's a question of being as smart as we can in catalyzing quality and quantity of private investment. And finally, governance. It remains a problem. It remains a problem almost across the emerging world. A few countries manage to sort of move beyond middle class into upper middle class, I suppose, but it's still the exception rather than the rule. And the countries that went through the Dutch disease once again are probably the worst affected, the Brazils and Russias and South Africas. But every emerging country really has to address the issue of governance. Corruption, accountability, knowing who your clients are, your citizens, your businesses. That's a culture. And that's another reason why I'm also more optimistic about India now than I was 10 years ago. Because I think Prime Minister Modi's government and the broader social culture is just moving in that direction. People are just more aware. They don't tolerate abuses and inefficiency as much as before. And standards go up. And that's itself a motive force for convergence and catching up. Governance. And again, it's free. It doesn't involve budgetary expenditure. So when you think about a lot of the things we do, getting into global value chains, it doesn't cost money. It's a strategy. Regulating smartly to incentivize private investment. No money expended. Governance. In fact, you save money. You avoid leakages. That, I think, is the way to go. It's not a demand-oriented perspective. It's about institutions. It's about culture. And ultimately, it leads to a big lift. Finally, I think we all know, and I have to say this because Ramadure is somewhere here, that what leads to standards of living going up, with productivity just being a measure of what enables that, is ultimately human capital. Human capital up and down the line. That has to be our most fundamental strategy. India was a laggard in that regard. India had, again, it's a country of extremes, has some of the highest peaks in terms of individual expertise and excellence, some of the best managed companies in the emerging world, but the averages are low in India. The averages have been dismal in education. Quantity has now been improved. Primary school enrollment is better, including for the girls. Transition from primary to secondary is better than it used to be, but we all know the problems. Teachers don't turn up, and quality is a problem. I think tackling how we develop every individual and how we develop our human capital collectively is still by far the most important strategy. And there too, it's not just about money, although some public investment has to go into it, and it's probably the best public investment. It's also about strategy. What do we focus on? And I would like to highlight in particular the criticality in Asia of moving away from an overemphasis on the academic path to advancement towards a skills-oriented path. It develops people better, it matches their strengths better, and it matches the needs of the marketplace better. That's a major reorientation. And India really shouldn't repeat the problems seen in the rest of Asia. If you look at Korea today, Taiwan today, even China today, massive underemployment or unemployment of university graduates. They've spent money, good part of family savings, and they're not going to get the returns. It leads to frustration. And in democracies, that frustration manifests itself quite differently from in China. So let's focus on developing every individual, girl or boy, making sure that we suss out their strengths somewhere along the route when they're in high school, give them a tertiary path that matches those strengths rather than a formulaic academic path, and bring the private sector and industry into education at an earlier stage. It can be done. It's central to our strategies in Singapore. We are not perfect, but that's ingrained in how we go about our strategies. Develop every individual. So that's where I want to end off. I'm optimistic because we know things can be done, and India is one of the countries that's moving in a meaningful way. You know, every time I come to India, I'm charmed by the fact that Indians have lots of negative things to say about India. But there's a lot of positive as well, you know. There's a lot of positive as well. You're moving in the right direction. It's a very complicated environment. And on the things that really matter, India is moving in the right direction. And I'm optimistic. There's tremendous scope for India to converge with the frontier, to leapfrog through new and unconventional strategies using technology, and to improve governance. Tremendous scope.